So I wanted to say that I am reading this book currently, and I'm actually almost done with this piece of literature. And the book is called Caste, and it's called The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. So it's called Caste. Um, and so far, it is really, really informative. It's an eye opener, and it also gives you the parallels of how residents or people who are from India are treated in terms of caste, and how African Americans here in the US are treated in terms of caste, and how the Jews were treated by the Nazi regime in terms of caste. And so, if you're wondering what caste means, for those that are wondering, formal and informal social stratification and classification which confers your status. So caste is a form of social stratification characterized by endogamy, a hereditary transmission of a style of life, which often includes an occupation, ritual status, and hierarchy, customary social interaction, exclusion based on cultural notions of purity and pollution. So it's pragmatic ethnographic example is the division of India's Hindu society into rigid social groups. And so it takes you into a journey in the lives of people in India and the lives of the early part of World War I and II. It even takes you back into a time of Jim Crow and before Jim Crow era, and how people were classified based on their race, based on who they are as people, and within their race classifications, how we classify one another. And so I felt that the book was really not only just informative, but it is also an eye-opener into other lives of people who also are parallel with African American lives here in the U.S. and how they have been treated historically based on systemic racism and the systems that are put up structurally that pretty much perpetuates social discrimination of African Americans, people of color, and then you have what is called there's a particular violence that we see with African Americans that are abused by law enforcement, the judicial system, and it's sanctioned violence that is legalized. And so we've been seeing a lot of killings, we've been seeing a lot of shootings, and then we've been seeing a lot of uprisings and resistance as well in the same, all in the same full spectrum of what has been going on. And so I felt that this book was really a great book, and it's on Amazon, it's also on eBay. Doesn't cost that much, it's under $30. You might can find it even in other places, but it's a really great read. I couldn't find myself putting it down. And as a matter of fact, I also in conjunction with this book, I have read The Color of Money, Black Banks, and Racial Wealth Gap by Mehrsa Baradaran. And I've also read what is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and also by Rothstein. I've read the. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can get that book. um, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. It didn't take me very long to finish these books. I've actually I have done a lot of reading, a lot of studying during this time of the pandemic, so I'm not afraid to share that. I'm also currently reading The Room Where It Happened by John Bolton. It's a White House memoir. The former National Secretary or Security is the former National Security Advisor of the United States. He actually was in the Donald Trump administration. So I'm currently reading that one as well, which is a great read, and it's very informative and really shows a lot about who our leader currently is and the flaws that he has in terms of leadership. And being it shows that John Bolton has a long tenure with the White House and his positions, he's been there for the whole time. I think this might have been the shortest time that he had to resign. And he's not alone in this. There have been others that have resigned prior to him, and many that I've known, even as far back as Omarosa. I know she has a book as well. I haven't really gotten into her book, but I know her book is also available. There's also some other books that are well noted that are having to do with the White House. But this book, Caste, getting back to Isabel Wilkerson, excuse me for clearing my throat. She is a journalist, an American journalist, and it was interesting learning about her life. Isabel Wilkerson is an American journalist and an author of Warmth of Other Suns, and an epic story of American Great Migration. And the book that I'm currently almost done with is Caste. The book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. So she talks candidly about her life and how she was also affected and how she was put in some tough spots as well, which was I thought was really neat for her to share some of her experiences as well. So I just thought I would share that on this particular video. If you are a person that likes to read, such as I do, you might want to consider getting these particular books. They're really good reads. There's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent, and then there's, which I was really felt that this book, The Color of Law, was very, very influential, and very informative about it. It basically, how I felt about that book is that it made me feel like now I know why things are the way they are. And Caste also made me feel, when I read these books, I realized that, as a black woman here in the U.S., I know I'm not, I was never crazy when I experienced the experiences that I had. Like, it was as if these people knew what I was going through, and, having to do with the housing market, the reason why, if you have, as a black person in the U.S., if you have gone through struggles being, it shows that you've tried to get your foot wet in the housing market and you've been mistreated, or you've been you felt like they only steered you to certain neighborhoods, which I felt like that happened to me. Even though they say that they have um, done away with the redlining, they have also have this reverse redlining where they tried to get people to get homes who could not really afford it. Um, you have those people out there, and then if you try to do it the right way, it's so hard. It's so hard to do it when you have a job that doesn't really pay very well, because they have a debt to income ratio when you meet with a realtor, or if you meet with someone about trying to get into a home, and if you're just someone wanting to have a home. You're not looking to really just move. You're not looking, you want to pretty much stay situated. You just want to buy your first home and then remain there for a number of years. You're not really looking, you're hoping to maybe pass it along to your children. It's not as easy as how you see they make it. And so I think things, however, now because of the coronavirus, the dynamic of that is going to change the housing market for the long run. I believe we're headed for another 2008 housing crisis 2.0, 2.3, if you want to say, if you would, where a lot of people, and now it's not even just houses, it's renters who will be put out, and it always tends to be low income and people of color that are heavily affected by these crises. And so I would recommend that, my opinion recommendation would be this book. It goes into the history of housing, and even how people were prohibited from living in neighborhoods even if they had good credit and they had the money to buy a home. There were housing or neighborhood covenants, and that is when you have a group of people who keep out another individual based on who they are, what they look like, their race, and they don't want you to live in the neighborhood, and they do everything to try to get you to, if you are able to acquire a home in the neighborhood, they try to intimidate you so that you will move out of that neighborhood. And in most cases, what I've read, it had worked for a long while. And now it's a thing of people can't afford to live in some neighborhoods. But with this pandemic, it's also really, really an eye opener, because now you have this virus, and now you have this housing crisis that is at a tipping point, and this moratorium. So I felt that this was a really, really great book in terms of that. It tells you what happened before, all the way up to now. You're thinking about, wow, just think of who's being affected by all of this and what could happen. You would think that housing would go down and get cheaper, and that the rents would get cheaper, but it almost seems as though they're trying to keep things at a certain point. But I believe something's got to give. If you want people to live in neighborhoods and you want to get rent from them, you need to make it affordable so that they can continue living there and paying you the money, if you want renters like that. But then if you want people to move into homes, and I feel that from what I read, I learned that houses are a big key player in um, the structure of how society runs, in terms of where they get the monies for funding for communities, and the input of community residents and people who want to be active residents there, in terms of the schools, the infrastructure in the neighborhood, and to keep things, at a positive, not only economically, but also a community based experience where everybody pitches in together. They care about their neighborhood. You ever driven down streets where it's clean and people have nice lawns and they're trying to take care of their homes? It may not be real fancy, but you show you show that you care about your community, and you would hope that most of your money in taxes goes to fixing the roads and the streets and the residence areas, that it goes to the schools. But I've seen neighborhoods where it's the opposite, where you do have people who care about the community, but they distance themselves from communities too because of the demographics of who's in the communities. And I'm knowing that when I've seen communities of color, you have sometimes neighborhoods where they don't take care of the streets, and it's not the people living there, it's the people that are running the community in terms of, the policies, where the money is going. It's not going, even though the residents are caring about their community, you have people using the money for things that aren't really about the community. And they want to get voted in, but they're not doing what they said that they were going to do by the people living in these communities. And then they blame, the scapegoats are the people who live there. And the people who live there are not the reason why the roads are torn up. And so this book really shows a lot about, even I was totally unaware about the freeways, how that displaced people. There was a whole history about in LA how freeways were put up to basically move and displace black residents out of neighborhoods. So you really need to read these things because it gives you an eye opener to a lot of things that you may not have even thought about. Um, Also, The Color of Money. The Color of Money was a really good book in terms of the economic end of it, and how black people in the past tried to do everything in their power to create um, um, banks, black banks, and how they struggled with trying to keep those banks afloat, and how they were discriminated against. This is digital copy, so don't get happy. It's actually more when it's a digital copy. But this book here basically talks about the history of black people having to do with the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, how neighborhoods were burned down to the ground because of being prosperous economically and trying to get their foot on the ground, or trying to acquire their own wealth, but they needed a collective unit in terms of economics. With banks, it was more trickier because there was so much discrimination and so much racism that kept black people from acquiring the goals that they needed to actually keep their banks running efficiently. So it seems as though here you have these mainstream banks that are able to funnel all this money and stay afloat and not go under. And then you have these black banks who are just struggling, just trying to make it. And some of them lasted a while others just kind of went under because they didn't have the support of the white community um, cohorts to keep the banks running. And a lot of times, what they did was take money from black banks and use it for the banks that were exclusively white. And so it talks a lot about things that a lot of young people don't even realize happen. And it really lets you know why things are the way they are, that none of this is by accident, it's by design. And it has been orchestrated and perpetuated, which I've always known because it felt that way to me. Even relationships. If you look at the book, The New Jim Crow, it talks about how black males were thrown in jail in large numbers. And if you look at that book, and as a black woman, and the you start thinking about, wow, I remember hearing this in the 90s, black women saying there's no black man around. And I believe this was the reason why, is because you had a situation where even in the Clinton years, that there were a lot of black males that were heavily incarcerated. And so there was a lot of mass incarceration. And it says there's mass incarceration in the age of color blindness. And so I felt like by me reading all of these fine reads, they all coincided. Here you got different authors from different, some of them may be, most of them, all of them are, I believe, are U.S. citizens, but they're all from different aspects, and they're taking on similar circumstances, but in different angles. You have one that's dealing with the law enforcement and incarceration, mass incarceration. One that's dealing with banks and the economic part of it. Another economic aspect of it is the housing market and people who are renters, people who want to live in homes and have families and nice place to live. Then you have a person who's looking at different countries and how they have their structural caste system that parallels and has some strong indicators of similarity to what African American people have dealt with historically, based on structural racism and sanctioned violence and systemic racism that has existed for many decades. And now, recently, we had a Supreme Court justice, a woman who she was there in a seat making decisions. And I know she's not black, but she was liberal, and she did make some really high profile decisions in some real historical cases that helped a lot of people. And she has a track record in pop culture and in society, and she just passed away at 87 from pancreatic cancer. And so not even days went by, and already you have the Trump administration jumping on who's going to take this woman's place, because they're more concerned about changing the world with their slogan, Make America Great Again, sounding like the book that I read with The Color of Law, where they want to make America like the 50s and 60s, where they discriminate blacks and they discriminate Hispanic people, all people of color, and pretty much put you in a place where you're in a box and you can't get out. And they control everything. And so that is the way it has been historically, and that we've gradually tried to get away from a lot of those strenuous and harsh um, policies and discriminatory practices and policies. And then we had a great person that also passed away, who was a freedom fighter. Um, um, John Lewis. And John Lewis, he really was influential. He's a civil rights icon and member of the U.S. House of Representatives. John Lewis of Georgia was a freedom fighter for more than 60 years, and he was called one of the most courageous activists in the civil rights movement era that he dedicated his life to protecting human rights, securing civil liberties, and building what he called the beloved community in America. And that was his premise. And so, for those of you, I always really admired John Lewis, especially I remember being a kid and watching the news and seeing, which was probably a rerun in my days. Um, I would see Martin Luther King, and then I would see all the groups of people marching on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and there was John Lewis and what they went through, and he really took a lot of blows to the head. And for someone to be so courageous and go through all of what they went through, and I thought about all of those people who fought for so many to get where they are today, and yet we have an administration who's trying to take us back into a time where we have to fight again and again and again. And so much has been done to try to be inclusive, to bring more positivity, and to bring more inclusiveness instead of divide. And now we've got people who are trying to divide. And it has worked, and it has caused uprisings. It's caused uprisings that are people who are now waking up to the fact that we're at a turn in our lives. Also knowing that we've come to a place where a lot of people could be homeless. I've been noticing a number of years that I've been here in California. I've noticed I used to see homeless people, but not this many homeless people. I'll say that. It used to be people who were homeless, they had either mental illness, and it's not that it's not still like that, but it's the dynamics of this is a lot different than what it used to be because of the increases in rent and more hidden racism, where it's nonchalant, and this nonchalant attitude about everything is colorblind. And we're post-racial because Obama administration took effect, that like all of a sudden everything is fixed now and we can move on with our lives. We don't have to worry about reparations because we had a black president based on Mitch McConnell's theory. Um, and so I feel like I've noticed over the years that homelessness has grown exponentially, and we see more and more homeless people on the street, and not because of mental illness or drugs or substance abuse. It's because they simply can't pay the rent. And we see different levels, different types of homeless. You see people living out of motels, people living out of RVs, people living out of their car, people couch surfing, and not because they're in the air. Some little couch surfing where they have it online. Some of the young people do that. But these people are doing it because they have nothing else, completely nothing else. It's not because it's fun or it's just, the fact that it's cheaper. It's because that's all they have. They're couch surfing from maybe a friend or somebody. It's almost like hitchhiking, but hitchhiking a place to sleep, a bed to lay. Um, you see people now on the beach in tents, beaches that you never seen homeless people like that. Now you see more of it. Now they're taking over the beaches, and they're encamped around beaches, they're encamped around parks, public places. And so as the years go forward, you see more and more and more of what was just really designated to Skid Row downtown. You thought it was only just there. It's now spread everywhere. And you see it in front of the court buildings, you see it around in downtown area. And now that we have this virus, some people had died, but some still remain. And you see a lot that still remain. And now you see a lot of those gentrified areas in downtown are like ghost towns because of the virus. Because from what I saw online, people posting that a lot of people got sick. They were living in those high-rise buildings with the elevators, and you see people, they were making like six-figure incomes, but it wasn't enough to shield them from the virus. And so a lot of those people, they left those units, those condos, and their rental condos, and or their luxury apartments, and they have like rooftop pools and gyms, and that's basically what they were paying for. And then they realized this virus hit, and a lot of them were meshed together downtown, and then you started seeing people moving away and started considering, let's go back to the suburbs because it's spread out. You're not pushed together with folks in a small confined space. And I believe they gentrified those neighborhoods. They had been doing downtown for years. They were trying to get people to gentrify. And then they had a scandal with a guy that was working in City Hall, I believe. His name was Jose Huizar. I believe that's his name. Where he was funneling money from these people from out in China, and they were giving him perks, and him and other staffers. And I guess they had a lot to do with the development of downtown and some of the units that get put up. And he basically was allowing these condo developers and all that to come in and just take over. And that explains why you have a lot of people that are homeless downtown, a lot of empty units. Also, and that was even before the pandemic, we had the homeless crisis, but now it's going to get bigger. We have this moratorium that's supposed to go on until the end of December, and it's supposed to last up until 2021 of January, and then once it lifts, then what? You expect for these people who already were rent burdened to come up with all that money. I would believe that they're probably going to owe more than $20,000 or $30,000 by the time January comes. Maybe even $40,000 in rent, in back rent, and you expect them to come up with that. That's like putting money down on a house. And if people can't do that, how do you expect them to come up with the rent? And then you have the small landlords who are affected. They're not big company landlords, they're small landlords who depended on that rent income, so their livelihood could stand afloat, and it's not now. And so these books were an eye-opener. They were a great eye-opener into some of the icons, some of the things that went on in the past up to now, the different administrations, and it talks about in these books you can read. And I'm just a person like this. I like to read. I like to know. I like to learn. You're never too old to learn new things. In my book, I would say, in my book. And I don't know. I just really like the. I like writing. I like poetry. I like reading, and I like reading a lot of different novels. And I also like politics. I don't like how politics sometimes turn out for some people, but I like the the the, um, the morale in terms of the just knowing how politics moves the world. Um, and so if you do things the right way, it can help a lot of people. But if you do it the wrong way, as we've known, it can hurt a lot of people in the same way. I also, believe it or not, I also look at the stock market as well. I'm not wealthy. I might be wealthy in knowledge, but I'm not a big wig, rich, six-figure type of person. Um, However, funny, I've always felt like maybe money for me is around the corner. I don't know why. It's just a weird feeling I get. But I'm not somebody that is greedy. I wouldn't think I would be. I'm very selfless as a person. I'm giving and helpful, and I like to do a lot of things to help people. But um, I found these books in particularly, uh, um, other than just informative, um, and I feel like they add on to what I already know, and they add on to the character of who I am as a person. Um, I like to see things from different sides of the globe as well, how people are treated in other countries. So when I read the book Caste, that gave me another eye opener into how India, how their structure of hierarchy is, and then how in the World War I, World War II, and then the Hitler regime, how that played a big part in history and what goes on. And I feel like the reason why we've had so many problems in the black community, we've had some leaders who are not particularly jazzed about some Jewish leaders or Jewish community, which is weird. I know people would say, but I have really, my theory on that, opinion wise, is that I believe because not just because of, there were some Jewish producers on record labels that took advantage of young black rap artists. There was a time that was big and that was going on. That happened in NWA. But also how in this book Caste, it shows that sometimes when people are treated so harshly based on how they look, and then they're brought into the fold. Think about it. They're brought into the fold, and you're told, now we're not going to treat you how we were treating you as Jewish people and excluding you. We're going to treat you as white people in the U.S., and you're included in the fold and the benefits and privileges of being white. And so you would think people would say, we had been persecuted, we've been murdered, we've been slaughtered, we've been raped, beaten, killed, gassed. We're going to treat people of color with respect, and synonymously we know what their plight is because we experienced a cruel, harsh history as well. No, you're going to have some individuals that look at the fact that they can be included in a fold of individuals who discriminate others, and they turn from what they've experienced, their harsh reality, and now that they can switch and be in another category and gain access and assimilate to a culture that discriminates others based on skin color, they can now be accepted or are in the privileged class and then discriminate freely now those who are not looking like them. And they can reap the rewards, get nice schools, get into nice colleges, and acquire money, own banks, have their own synagogues, their own towns, buy property, open businesses, get loans, get housing access, live in their own gated communities, which you do see a lot of that when you come like up to the Beverly Hills area or Beverly Boulevard. There are a lot of temples and synagogues, and you'll see some communities that are just exclusively seen as though that they're only Jewish communities, and you can't afford that type of living over there because it's really expensive, and they've managed to get a footing as the black community has never been able to get a footing, and when they were, it was burned to the ground and they were stopped on every level. You had that Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black Wall Street, how they did have a community. We did have banks. We did have, businesses that were thriving. But every time there were efforts made to do these things, there was individuals that got envious and they didn't want to see black people rising of this out of poverty and becoming successful, and they've done everything to alter it. And if it had to do with mob justice and racial mobs that would come out, and there was a lot of lynching during the Jim Crow era, even after they had freed, people think, oh, they freed the slaves and they let them go and then they didn't mistreat them. No, you got more harsh treatment. You were put in your place. There was Jim Crow, and then you were lynched. You couldn't go in certain neighborhoods. There was so many things. And what I learned in the book of the color of law is that you couldn't live in certain neighborhoods even if you had good credit. You had good credit and you bought a home. You couldn't live in certain neighborhoods because there were covenants. There weren't only sundown towns where you had to be out of the area before sundown. They didn't want you to, even some of them, didn't want you to live near. Some of the white community residents did not want you living near their neighborhoods. You couldn't even drive in there. And if you did, you're at your own risk. And so there's a lot of information, a wealth of information that I've, looked at. I'm sure there are other great reads out there. There have been others. I'm not done yet. There's a lot of other things, but I found it very enlightening, and I was very encouraged by reading, knowing that I knew that this had happened. Because when the smoke clears from destruction, how right now they're having all these wildfires in these areas, and it tends to be the areas that have these huge homes and these places by the mountains where people live. And when the smoke clears, you realize there was something lost here. There were memories, there were ambitions, there were families, there were people that they were striving for something. Or maybe they had a community. Maybe they had neighborhoods, they had family, they had a history here. And now it's all burned to the ground. And we see how those people feel. That is the way black people have felt when they come to these neighborhoods and they realize there's no money in the communities, the schools are poor, the stores don't have good food in it, the streets are buckled, there's potholes in the streets, you have homeless people on the corners begging for money, or they're on drugs. You have a lot of crime. You have shootings. You have people who have pretty much kind of given up, because they felt like the system has given up and had already given up on them. And so you realize when the smoke clears that this is what you're left with. And that is the same way that these communities are, where this is a generation of people who are the kids or grandkids of the people who went through these Jim Crow eras, the color of law era where they were displaced, and the kids of people who their parents were incarcerated and they were put in jails and they never to see the light of day, or they had ambitions and they wanted to open up businesses and their dreams were thwarted because they didn't have anyone that wanted to go in and help them succeed on what it is that they wanted to do to build their communities or to build their businesses. They weren't supported by their white counterparts. And so this is really informative, and I really think that people should really look at these things and read them and learn your history, your true history. Right now we have an administration that is trying to reverse that, where they want to take Black history out of the schools. There really was none, to be honest with you. I'll be honest. I didn't really see Black history being taught in schools. Even when I was going to school, it wasn't taught. The only thing we learned is about Martin Luther King, and very minimal. Only the positive side of his life, and that he was assassinated. They didn't really elaborate on that. We didn't learn about Malcolm X. We didn't learn about how his life was. You didn't learn about these things that I just showed you here. Some of the things that happened where Jackie Robinson, who was a baseball player, and he later tried to open up a bank, and he worried himself to sleep at night, worrying about how he's going to keep his bank open. You never learned about all that. That he was a resident of Pasadena in California, and and his life and what he tried to do. How he tried to play a part in the whole infrastructure on trying to build wealth in Black America, and how he was treated a certain way, even though he had a history. When he was playing ball, we seen the movie 45. I believe that's what it was called, right? Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson. That he was he was treated a particular way in his life, and how he died and what his legacy was before he left this earth. Of course, that he played an influential part, and most people know Jackie Robinson as the ball player. However, Jackie Robinson, he tried to establish a bank at one point, and it talks about it in The Color of Money. And so I'm gonna let this whole thing go, but I know I went further than what I had anticipated, but this is a great book. I would recommend this book. It was also one of the books that was on Oprah's book club, and she recommended it as well, but I'm recommending it. I don't know. That I think this is a really great read. It was hard for me to put it down. I couldn't put it down, so I found myself constantly going, reading. So But that's how I am, when I see things that are really informative and they have a lot of, historical content, and they pretty much give you a lot of insight on why things are operating the way they are in the world today. Also, I wanted to mention, when I usually read books about politics, I like to read it about some of the people who worked in the administrations, like the one we currently have, which is the Trump administration. And so I'm reading this book by John Bolton, and he is a security and he's an American lawyer and a diplomat. And this is John Bolton. He's an attorney, a diplomat, a Republican, and a consultant and a political commentator who served as a 25th United States. It says Bolton's, and he's now being investigated. So his book publisher has been subpoenaed by the DOJ, and they're investigating him for disclosures in the room where it happened. And so he is former national security advisor of the U.S., and he worked in the Trump administration. And so he basically lays out some of the very informative feats that Trump had embarked on in the part of his administration, even the Kim Jong-un summit, which I found interesting. So I'm not going to go into any details because, the book's being investigated, but it was really, really informative. And so I think that he's, Trump, when people fall out of favor with Trump, he has harsh criticism towards them. He called John Bolton a dummy. I don't think he's a dummy. I think that he was displeased with the way the administration was going, and he wanted out. Of course, there's other things that will come out, and I won't say too much about it because this book is being investigated, but I really found it to be very truthful in a lot of ways. The things that were said in here, I don't think could be fabricated, as far as I've read. And, the thing that I found interesting is the fact that the part about Trump having his tweet storms, not having any of his work laid out on his desk in the Oval, but he's in another area, and he's got his Fox News, and he's watching TV, and he's tweeting. It all sounds so much like him. And that right there, I was like, wow, this is who we have as leadership. And, I'm like, that's crazy. And then some of the decision making, some of the real serious situations where they had been procrastinated to the very last moment and then ineffectively executed. And you can read about that when I'm talking about. There were some things that happened, and I was thinking, wow, that's sad. But anyway, the book, it says this book it says John Bolton's book publisher was subpoenaed, and I know Trump had everything to do with this. Anytime there's something about Trump, anytime there's a book about him, it's a hoax, or it's not, what he, to his liking. And so this is the book I have, John Bolton's holding. I felt it was a good book, a really good book in terms of describing some of the incidences here. And let me read this in closing. John Bolton's book publisher subpoenaed, investigating disclosures in the room where it happened. And I believe this is probably like a video that's attached to it. which I'm not going to be really looking at. I guess because this is by Kevin Johnson out of USA Today, and you see Trump there. So federal prosecutors have issued a grand jury subpoena to John Bolton's book publisher as part of a criminal investigation into whether the former national security advisor unlawfully disclosed classified information in a recent book critical to President Donald Trump. A person with knowledge of the matter said Tuesday. So Justice Department demands for records from Simon & Schuster's comes after the Trump administration failed in its effort earlier this year to halt publication of the book. And so the room where it happened, the threats from President that his former aide could face prosecution, so justice officials declined to comment. Charles Cooper, Bolton's attorney, said that they are aware of the reports that the subpoenas have been issued but denied any wrongdoing. Ambassador Bolton emphatically rejects any claim that he acted improperly, let alone criminally, in connection with the publication of his book, and he will cooperate fully as he has throughout with the official inquiry into his conduct. And so I don't think John Bolton's a dummy, and he should not be criminally prosecuted for a book that's an eye-opener, informative about his tenure in the administration. I believe he's not the only one. There have been others that have written books. There's namely one by Michael Cohen, I believe that's his name. I may not be saying his name right. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. His book might be more inflammatory because I believe he was Trump's lawyer for many years, and he knows a lot about Trump. And his book comes straight out, flat out, and just lays everything out on the personality and character of Donald Trump. This book just basically talks about how he was in the Oval, how he was with some of, I don't want to go into, well, I'll just mention one, the Kim Jong-un summit. That. And it's true, he was obsessed with that. And he said it, he was obsessed with that and the photo ops. So anyway, so I won't go into too much of that. But the investigation was first disclosed by the New York Times. So in June, a federal judge cleared the way for the book's publication, ruling that the numerous copies already distributed, it would be futile to stop it. And so the hundreds and thousands of copies around the globe that have already been put out, I've got one of them. So many of the newsrooms, the damage is done, wrote the U.S. District Judge Royce C. Lamberth. There is no damage done. It's basically, it's an eye-opener, it's formative, it's truth. So there is no restoring the status quo, but the judge also sharply rebuked Bolton for not following the government's pre-publication clearance protocols regarding potentially classified material, and suggested that he could lose his $2 million advance for this book. And so the Bolton has gambled with the national security of the U.S., the judge wrote, and so he has exposed his country to harm and himself to civil and potentially criminal liabilities. So in terms of the book, there was a protocol that he was supposed to follow. He didn't, and so that's what they're trying to get him on. But he's not the only one that wrote a book. There are other people that wrote books, I think, that were more inflammatory than this. This one really just basically is expressive. It talks about what he experienced while he was there. And it's not as inflamed as I believe the Michael Cohen book is going to be. But these facts do not control the motion before the court, and so the government has failed to establish that the injunction will prevent irreparable harm. How could you harm something that's already bad, So we see what's going on. Americans see what's happening. I don't think this book is going to do any harm to what's going on. But the following, the judge ruling, Trump quickly weighed in on Twitter, of course, which was suggested in the book, that he has these sweet songs, which is true. See, there you go. Suggesting that Bolton would have a really big price to pay. Okay, price to pay. And so he likes dropping bombs on people and killing them, the president wrote. Okay, and so now he will have bombs dropped on him. Okay, and so this is the thing. Bolton has been has been, he has a track record in government a lot longer than Trump even. And so he knows how things operate. I'm not saying that he's perfect, but we'll see here. So legal, and you'll learn about what the dropping bombs on people if you read the book and what all that means. So legal analysis said that the Justice Department's action and its history of intervention in the other cases on the side of Trump's allies smacked of retaliation. So given the way the administration gamed the review system to prevent the book from being published, and then Trump repeatedly called on Bolton to be prosecuted, it's hard to see this as anything other than a direct retaliation. So Matt Miller, a former justice spokesman in the Obama administration, tweeted on Tuesday, and it's retaliation. So Miller referred to the government's pre-publication review process used to screen books and other publications for classified information that officials assess in their former government roles. Bolton has asserted that the administration abused the process, effectively delaying the book. So James Melendrez, a former justice official involved in the prosecution of former CIA Director David Petraeus, who ultimately pleaded guilty to mishandling classified information, said the department track's record in other high-profile cases cannot be ignored. So Melendrez, now a partner of the firm of Snell and Wilmer, referred to the Trump Justice Department intervention in the prosecutions of the president's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, the political advisor, Roger Stone, both cases brought by former Russia's special counsel, Robert Mueller. Okay, and justice abruptly abandoned Flynn case in May after the retired Army general pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his contracts, a Russian ambassador. And so the trial judge continues to challenge the department's action. So the Stone case, which he actually got his friend out of prison, Donald Trump, and so he commuted his sentence, or he was able to get him out of prison. And a lot of people question that. Why did you get, Roger Stone out of prison? And so in the Stone case, justice officials recommend a lighter sentence for the political operative over the obligations of prosecutors following Stone's conviction for lying to Congress and obstruction. So Trump ultimately granted his friend clemency, saving Stone from a prison sentence of slightly more than 3 years. So in Bolton's investigation, looks like retaliation or vindictiveness are involved both in the legal sense and in the common sense, Melendrez said. So Mark Zaid, who specializes in national security law and whistleblower defense, said the justice action could be taken both as retaliation and legitimate legal scrutiny. And so from the legal perspective, there is nothing inappropriate based on existing law for the administration to pursue its current course of action, Zaid said. But from a policy standpoint, this is highly and historically unusual. So prior administrations have many examples of hardline approaches about certain topics, but the Trump administration in particular goes out of its way to punish and perceive enemies and critics. And it is no stretch of the imagination to believe that President Trump personally wants John Bolton punished in every imaginable way, but demonstrating selective prosecution is one of the hardest defenses to assert. And so I believe that's true. He's just really going after him because I read, even with some of the others that have walked away from the administrations, usually when you fall out of favor with Trump, it's no going back, and it's you just get persecuted from that point on. You're even called names. He called Omarosa names. He called her, I believe he called her a dog. And so and like he called Bolton, he called him a dummy. And I don't believe any of it's true about any of the people with the names he calls them. So anyway, I'm going to let this go. I know I went a long ways. So that was just going into the whole debacle about John Bolton's book, The Room Where It Happened. So I felt like during this pandemic, I had a wealth of information that was fed to me by my own doing, of course. And there's much more. There's some other books, some other things that I'm dabbling in. So this is Isabel Wilkerson. The book I had originally started talking about. She's the American journalist, and I would say get her book. Yeah, if you want to read about the caste hierarchies and the historical content having to do with India, the Hitler regime, and the Jewish persecution, and then African Americans throughout history, how everything has been pretty much set up in a structural situation where there has been class divisions based on race, skin color, and all the different structures that were put in place dating back from like even slavery to the Jim Crow and the migration of people going to the north and how they were treated, and different jobs, how people are treated. It's very informative and very, very culturally aware, and it's a great book. But anyway, having said that, I'm going to let this video go. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. And keep your eyes and your ears open, because there's so many things that are going on in the world that are pivotal right now, and we're moving into a time where our Constitution is at stake, in terms of how it is being run, and so I feel like it's just good to be aware of what kinds of things are before you. If you know about your past, then you'll know about where your future is headed. Having said that, thanks for listening.